Have you ever stopped to think about how seeing someone who looks like you on TV or maybe in a position of power can actually change things? Well, today we're going to dive deep into that powerful connection between identity, representation, and the real-world fight for social change, specifically in the English-speaking world. And this, of course, fits right into our AMC curriculum. We're working within Theme 2, Diversity and Inclusion, and we're focusing on the axis of plurality of cultures and identities. We're really asking, what actually happens when minorities are represented or misrepresented? What are the consequences of being seen? Okay, let's kick things off with this image. It's from a report by Stop AAPI Hate, which is a coalition in the U.S. fighting discrimination. Now, the quote here talks about the need for a group to speak the loudest and to mobilize people. This whole idea of a collective voice, that's exactly what we're getting into today, and it leads us right to our main question. So, I want you to keep this question in your head as we go through everything today. We're going to unpack how seeing yourself, or just as importantly, not seeing yourself, in the media and in politics can actually shape who you believe you are and how that can light a fire for movements that create real, lasting change.
Right, here's our plan. First, we'll nail down some key concepts. Then we'll look at a global movement to see them in action. After that, we'll connect it all to the world of politics. And to finish, we'll talk about how you can use all of this to build a really strong analysis for your exams. Sound good? Let's go.
Okay, part 1. Before we can really analyze the documents, we need the right tools in our toolbox. So we're going to start with a solid foundation by looking at 2 really important academic ideas that connect our personal identity with the world around us. First up is this idea of biculturalism. And honestly, this is fascinating stuff. Research shows that people who are deeply involved in more than one culture, what we call biculturals, they often develop what's called cognitive complexity. In plain English, it means their brains get really good at processing and understanding culture in a more nuanced, sophisticated way. It's almost like a cognitive superpower you get from living between 2 worlds. So, how do we go from one person's identity to a huge social movement? Well, social identity theory gives us the answer. It basically says that a huge part of who we are comes from the groups we belong to. You know, we see ourselves as part of a group, we start to adopt its values, and pretty soon we feel that powerful sense of us. This isn't just some abstract theory. It is literally the engine that drives social change. All right, part 2. Let's see how these concepts actually work in the real world. We're going to take a close look at a perfect case study, the hashtag Stop Asian Hate movement, which kicked off in the US but quickly became a global conversation. Now, check this out, because this is where things get really interesting. Research shows there was a major difference in what was fueling the movement. So in the US, the hashtag exploded mostly in response to violent physical attacks on individuals. But when you look at the global conversation in other languages, the spikes were often triggered by racist comments aimed at famous people, artists, athletes. We're talking 2 different sparks for the very same fire. So who was driving that huge global push? Well, the answer might actually surprise you. That same study found that a massive, well-organized international community of K-pop fans was the main engine behind it all. They got in early, and they kept the conversation going long after others had moved on, pushing it way beyond America's borders. And this chart just puts that into perspective. I mean, just look at the numbers. Of the non-English users in the study, a massive 62% were K-pop fans. It's a fantastic example of how a cultural community, one that's just built around a shared passion, can transform into a powerful force for social justice. And this is exactly why movements like this are so incredibly important. Research on hate media makes it absolutely clear. Online hate is not just words. It has real, tangible, damaging effects. It creates negative stereotypes, it breaks down trust between communities, it's directly linked to violence, and it has a serious negative impact on people's mental health. Okay, so we've seen a hashtag create a community and raise a ton of awareness. But here's the big question. Does that online energy actually change things in the real world, systemically? Let's bridge that gap between social media and the halls of power. Does visibility actually matter in politics? I mean, this is one of the most fundamental questions for any democracy, right? If you see a politician who shares your background, your identity, does that actually make a difference in how you think or how you vote? Well, the data says yes. A huge yes. A study of elections in the UK and Australia found something pretty amazing.
when certain parties nominated a candidate from an ethnic minority, their support for minority voters jumped by about 10 percentage points. Now, a 10-point swing is not small. That can literally decide an election. It's a massive impact. And this all boils down to a really important concept called descriptive representation. It's the idea that our elected officials should reflect the communities they serve, not just in what they promise to do, but in who they are, their race, their gender, their backgrounds. And this research proves that's not just a nice thought, it actually works. Seeing someone like you in power can make you feel more connected to the whole process and even change your vote. Okay, let's bring it all home. For our last part, we're going to get super practical. We're going to focus on how you can take all these ideas we've talked about and use them to build a really powerful analysis in your essays and oral exams for the baccalaureate. Now, this simple 3-step method is basically your secret weapon for writing a great analysis. It's idea, example, explanation. It's so simple. First, you state your point. Then you back it up with a specific piece of evidence. And finally, and this is the most important part, you explain how that evidence proves your point, linking it all back to our big themes like identity and power. So let's do a quick run-through. Your idea might be that online activism gives minority groups the power to control the conversation. Your example? The fact that the hashtag #StopAsianHate hashtag peaked a full day before the mainstream news really picked up the story. And your explanation? This shows a massive shift in power. These groups are no longer just reacting to the news, they are making the news. And so that brings us full circle. We've seen that representation is so much more than just feeling seen. It actively shapes our identity, it can fuel global movements, and it can literally change the outcome of an election. So the question I want to leave you with, the one I want you to really think about for your own analysis, is this. If representation is that powerful, what should we, as citizens, be demanding from our media and from our leaders?